Many years later, facing the firing squad at Semyonovsky Square, Fyodor Dostoevsky would remember the distant December morning when he realized he had only 5 minutes of life left. Friends, let us pause at this moment and make a bold assumption. Imagine you are him. Imagine you have only the last 5 minutes of your life remaining. This is not a metaphor nor a movie trope, but right here and now your life has truly entered its countdown. You are standing in the freezing wind of December facing a row of soldiers raising their rifles. The muzzles are dark holes staring at you like the eyes of the Grim Reaper. Your brain becomes terrifyingly clear at this moment. These 5 minutes for you are no longer time but a massive fortune about to be squandered. How would you spend these final 5 minutes? You might spend 2 minutes bidding farewell to the comrades and friends beside you, looking at their faces, memorizing their final expressions. Then you might spend 2 minutes, even if just 2 minutes, to think about yourself for the last time. Who are you? Why are you here? And what exactly have you made of your life? The remaining 1 minute you would save for the world. You would greedily look at everything around you, even the bare branches or the gilded dome of the distant cathedral. You would stare at a ray of sunlight reflecting off that dome, feeling that is where you are about to return. You would think that in 3 minutes I will become that thing, I will melt into that light. At this moment, a thought more terrifying than death would suddenly hit you. It smashes into your soul like a heavy hammer, leaving you breathless. What if I don't die? If life could be restored, if all of this could be taken back? What an infinity that would be. I would turn every minute of the future into a whole century. I would count every second like a miser, never letting even a single moment pass in vain. This extreme desire for life would turn into a massive rage, making you even wish they would shoot faster to end this unbearable torture. Friends, the scene just now is not a fictional plot I invented. This is a real scene that happened on December 22, 1849 at Semyonovsky Square in St. Petersburg, Russia. The young man standing under the gun experiencing this hellish 5 minutes was the man later hailed as the greatest novelist in human history and the most profound psychologist, Fyodor Dostoevsky. This 5-minute near-death experience completely reshaped his soul and laid the groundwork for the grand theme we are to discuss today. Why do I start with this story? Because what we are talking about today is not just a literary masterpiece nor just the life of a writer. We are talking about when you are stripped of all disguises, when you face the void directly. How should you know yourself? How should you find a foothold in this chaotic world? The reason Dostoevsky's works are as sharp as a scalpel, the reason they can precisely cut open the psychological lesions of us modern people, is because he once stood on that edge of life and death and peered into the bottom of the abyss. What he brought back was not cheap comfort but the cruel truth about human nature. Before we delve into his soul-shaking work, Crime and Punishment, we need to first understand how this man with a unique and tragic voice was forged. Because if you don't understand his era and the suffering he endured, you cannot truly read the warnings about nihilism and the trap of rationality he buried in his books. These warnings transcended their time back then. And today, in this modern world where faith has collapsed and rationality reigns supreme, they are not outdated but have become deafeningly loud and even more critical. Dostoevsky was born in Moscow in 1821. His family environment was filled with a fateful repressive color from the very beginning. He was born into a wealthy Orthodox Christian family and his father was a successful doctor. But please note their home was located right within the hospital grounds where his father worked. You can imagine the young Dostoevsky. What kind of place his childhood was spent in. A hospital, a place filled with birth, aging, sickness and death, filled with painful groans and the smell of disinfectant. This early close contact with suffering combined with the family's strong religious atmosphere likely constituted the unique undertone of extreme sensitivity to human suffering in his later creations. Fate did not seem to intend to be kind to him. When he was just a teenager, his mother died of tuberculosis. This is a huge blow to any child. But this was not the worst part. When Dostoevsky left home for school to study for a military engineering degree, news came of his father's death. This was a death filled with mystery and the scent of blood. Although there was no official conclusion, there were widespread rumors and speculations at the time. that his father was murdered by his own serfs in an act of vengeance due to his violent temper and mistreatment of them. The early death of both parents, especially the shadow that his father might have been murdered, pressed like a heavy stone on the young Dostoevsky's heart. These dark experiences fermented slowly and finally converged into that tragic power in his writing. After graduating from the Military Engineering Institute, he could have routinely worked as an engineer, living a stable, decent but perhaps mediocre life. But that flame deep in his soul would not let him settle for the status quo. His passion for literature and the humanities grew wildly like weeds. At first he only translated books in his spare time as an outlet. But soon this passion swallowed him. He made a risky decision to resign from his engineering job and devote himself entirely to writing. He wanted to use his pen to dissect this world. In 1846 he published his first book, Poor Folk. As soon as this book was released, it achieved huge commercial success. Literary critics of the time praised it endlessly, calling it Russia's first social novel. For a fledgling young man, this was a dreamlike start, as if fate had finally begun to smile upon him. However, this smile was brief and cruel. The books following this work met with failure. He found himself stuck in a creative quagmire, unable to reproduce his glory no matter how hard he tried. Following this came severe financial distress. This sense of loss from falling from the peak, coupled with financial pressure, pushed him onto another trajectory of fate. In 1847, when he was in his late 20s, nearing 30, perhaps due to dissatisfaction with the social status quo or a yearning for utopian ideals, Dostoevsky joined a radical group of writers and intellectuals. This group focused on discussing utopian socialism, trying to find a recipe for transforming society. In Tsarist Russia at that time, this behavior was undoubtedly playing with fire. The government soon began to purge these groups. In 1849, disaster struck and Dostoevsky was arrested. As punishment, he was sentenced to death. The method of execution was by firing squad. This is the thrilling moment we mentioned at the beginning. He waited for the arrival of death in the cold wind of December. He watched his comrades being tied to the posts, watched the soldiers raise their guns. He thought his life was about to end here meaninglessly. However, at this critical final moment, a fast horse delivered the Tsar's pardon. This was actually a thorough mock execution. It was a psychological war carefully designed by the Tsarist government, intended to implant deep fear in the prisoners' hearts, to make them collapse on the edge of death and thereby submit completely. Although his life was spared, he could not escape punishment. Dostoevsky was exiled to Siberia. There he was forced to undergo 4 years of hellish hard labor. What kind of life was that? Engaging in heavy physical labor in the extremely cold wasteland, surrounded by real criminals, murderers and robbers. He was forced to live with these people from the lowest and darkest strata of society. This experience was both torture and tempering for him. In 1860, when Dostoevsky finally returned from Siberia, he was no longer the radical youth keen on empty dreams. He had changed into a man who remains unfathomable even today. He started writing again, but this time his touch had changed. Gone were the naive utopian ideals, gone was the light optimism, replaced by a heavy tone of pessimism, a cold realism, and an almost morbidly acute insight into human psychology. He abandoned the fantasy that a perfect world could be achieved through social transformation. His gaze no longer looked outward but turned inward, turning to the exploration of the human spiritual world and the abyss of the psyche. In the following 20 years, until his death from lung disease in 1881, Dostoevsky produced a series of earth-shattering masterpieces. Notes from Underground, Crime and Punishment, The Idiot Demons and the Brothers Karamazov. Each one is a deep interrogation of the human soul. A very prominent theme was established in his works. That is a profound assessment of human suffering, especially his keen observation of the unexpected consequences that arise when humanity tries to overcome and eliminate suffering through reason and technology, especially in that specific historical context. Religious and spiritual anchors were being cut loose and God was being killed. Individuals and society were left alone to face this absurd world. People began to frantically worship reason, worship technology, trying to use these new gods to create a perfect, happy utopia. But Dostoevsky, the man who crawled out from the pile of the dead, he looked coldly at all this, looked at people feverishly building the Tower of Babel. He issued a warning. He told us that this worldview based on pure reason and utilitarianism would not only fail to save us but would push us into a deeper abyss. He wanted to tell us a truth about ourselves that we are unwilling to admit. That is, we are not as rational as we think. And we do not want happiness as much as we think. In 1864, a few years after Dostoevsky returned from the brink of death, he published a book that was short in length but massive in lethality called Notes from Underground. This book has no plot in the traditional sense. It is more like the monologue of a madman, the ranting of a retired civil servant hiding in a basement of a dilapidated apartment in St. Petersburg. We usually call him the Underground Man. This character even today remains one of the most uncomfortable yet most real figures in literary history. He is extremely intelligent but morbidly inferior. He sees through the hypocrisy of those around him yet desperately craves their acceptance. He is like a wounded rat hiding in the dark, maliciously cursing the sunny world above ground. Why did Dostoevsky create such a repulsive character? Because this underground man is like a dark mirror of his and of all of us. He is a frantic counterattack against the mainstream values of that time and even our current era. What values? The arrogance that reason can solve everything. Russia at that time, and indeed the entire Western world, was immersed in an optimistic dream. People believed that Newton had explained the physical world, and next we only had to use the same scientific methods to explain human society, to explain human psychology, and we could build a perfect heaven on earth. They called this ideal society the Crystal Palace. In this Crystal Palace everything is rational, everything is efficient. All suffering would be calculated and eliminated, all happiness could be derived by formulas. This sounds familiar, right? This is what we still firmly believe in today. If you are unhappy, it must be because of insufficient dopamine secretion, just take some medicine. If you are poor, it must be because of uneven distribution of social resources, just adjust the policy. We believe that as long as we input the correct instructions into this machine called human, it will output the result of happiness. But the voice hiding in the basement spat at this perfect crystal palace. He let out a piercing sneer. He proposed a paradox in the book that remains unsolved to this day. He said, "You rational architects, what do you think humans want? You think it is happiness, benefit, peace, and prosperity. You think that as long as these human needs are met, people will sit obediently in this crystal palace grateful. You simply do not understand humanity at all." Through the mouth of the underground man, Dostoevsky said that famous passage enough to put all sociologists out of work. He said, "Now I ask you, since man is a being endowed with strange qualities, what can we expect from him? Even if you shower upon him every earthly blessing, even if you drown him in a sea of happiness, so that nothing but bubbles of bliss can be seen on the surface, even if you give him economic prosperity, such that he should have nothing else to do but sleep, eat cakes, and busy himself with the continuation of his species, even then out of sheer ingratitude, out of sheer malice, man would play you some nasty trick. Yes, even in a perfect paradise, humans would deliberately destroy it all, just to prove to themselves that they are still men and not the keys of a piano." Please remember this metaphor, piano keys. This is Dostoevsky's most profound mockery of rationalism. If the world is truly rational, if our actions are truly only to pursue maximum benefit, then we are no different from the keys on a piano. A key has no will of its own, it just waits for an external force to strike it. If given a specific force, it must produce a specific sound. If humans also only follow the logic of maximizing benefits, then we have no free will, we are just slaves to the law of causality. The underground man tells us that deep in the human heart there is a desire stronger than the pursuit of happiness. That is the desire for autonomy, even if this autonomy is destructive. We would rather take risks, rather suffer, rather do things that seem completely crazy and stupid to reason, simply to prove to ourselves, I am free, I am a living person, not a screw, even if it is a gold-plated one. Look at the lives of us modern people. We possess material conditions our ancestors could not dare to imagine. We have smartphones, food delivery, air conditioning, endless entertainment. Logically speaking, we should be as happy as pigs. But why are anxiety, depression, and self-destructive behaviors becoming more and more common? Why do we stay up late scrolling through phones even knowing we will have a splitting headache at work tomorrow? Why do we deliberately procrastinate even knowing the deadline will kill us? Why do we suddenly go crazy and ruin a perfect relationship? Because that is the underground man deep in your soul screaming. He is using this irrational, self-destructive way to remind you. You are still alive, you have not been completely tamed by that perfect system. Dostoevsky even said that 2 + 2 = 4 is indeed beautiful, it is a truth. But 2 + 2 = 5 is sometimes also a very charming thing. This sounds like crazy talk, but it is the deepest insight into human nature. Reason tells us 2 + 2 must equal 4. But human will sometimes just wants it to equal 5. We want that right to be unreasonable. So when those utopianists, those who believe in the supremacy of science, try to stuff humanity into a perfect formula, they are doomed to fail. Because they ignored the most critical variable in human nature, irrationality. We are not machines that only calculate pros and cons. We are creatures full of contradictions, full of chaos, full of destructive desires. We pursue not only cakes and reproduction, we pursue freedom, where I have the final say even if the price is suffering. However, this freedom comes with a price. And the price is extremely expensive. Although the underground man sees through all this, the price he pays is paralysis. Because he thinks too much, because he sees through the absurdity behind all actions. So he can do nothing. He can only hide in the basement chewing on his resentment. He is a man of hyperconsciousness. For him, even a simple action like taking revenge on someone or even saying hello to someone requires countless internal trials and deductions. In the end, this excessive self-consciousness turns him into a cripple. This is the first stage of nihilism, paralysis. You see through the hypocrisy of society, you see through the cracks in the edifice of reason. You refuse to be a piano key. But apart from hiding in a dark corner laughing at those fools still running around on the ground, you can find no way out. You think you are wiser than them because you are awake. But in fact you are more pathetic than them because you have not only lost happiness but have not truly gained freedom. You are just trapped in your own mind. Trapped in an airtight prison woven by your own logic. So the question arises. If a person like the underground man sees through the hypocrisy of old morality, sees through the limitations of rationalism, but he is not resigned to just rotting in the basement. He is not resigned to paralysis, he wants to act. He wants to test his theory of transcending mortals in the real world. What would happen then? This brings us to Dostoevsky's next and even greater work. If Notes from Underground is the theory, then Crime and Punishment is the practice. The young man who was not resigned to hiding in the basement finally walked out. His name is Raskolnikov. He decided to stop just daydreaming, he wanted to act. He wanted to use a real axe to hack out a path to the Superman. But he never expected that when this axe fell, what shattered was not the old world he despised, but his own soul. If the underground man is paralyzed by thinking too much, then Raskolnikov is a man who tries to cure this paralysis through action. He is fed up with idling in his mind, he wants to leave his own scratch on this hard real world. But first we must clear up one of the biggest misconceptions in literary history. A cliché you might have heard from countless book bloggers. Many people will emphatically tell you Raskolnikov is the incarnation of Friedrich Nietzsche's Superman philosophy. They say this young man believes God is dead, so he tries to become his own God. He tries to transcend good and evil and create new morality like the Superman. This saying sounds cool and deep. But it has a fatal problem, which is that it is completely wrong. This misreads not only Nietzsche but also Dostoevsky. First of all, this does not hold water chronologically. Crime and Punishment was written in 1866 while Nietzsche first proposed God is Dead in 1882. By then Dostoevsky's bones would have been cold. More importantly, Raskolnikov is not a Superman at all. Quite the opposite, he is the kind of person Nietzsche despised the most. Nietzsche's Superman is an affirmer of life vitality, someone who can jump out of the old moral framework and truly create new values. And what about Raskolnikov? He is a passive container, a trash can filled with the popular thoughts of St. Petersburg at that time. He did not create any new morality, he was just imitating. He was imitating those radical nihilists, imitating those utilitarian mathematicians. Let's look at what he is actually thinking in the book. His situation is terrible, he is dirt poor, dropped out of law school, wandering the streets like a ghost. What breaks him even more is that his sister Junior, in order to help him raise tuition fees, decided to marry a rich jerk Luzhin. This is simply a disguised form of prostitution, a tragedy of self-sacrifice for her brother's future. Raskolnikov watches all this, his heart burning. At this moment his gaze falls on a person. The pawnbroker Alyona Ivanovna. This old woman is the perfect victim. She is greedy, mean, sucking the blood of the poor like a louse. She even abuses her innocent, intellectually disabled sister Lizaveta. In this world no one would be better off because of her existence. On the contrary, everyone is worse off because of her. So Raskolnikov's brain begins to work. Not a crazy operation, but a cold operation, precise as a scalpel. He starts to do an arithmetic problem. The problem goes like this. On one end of the scale is the life of a worthless, harmful, louse-like old woman. On the other end of the scale is the chest of money the old woman hides under her bed. If I kill her and take the money, I can save my sister from jumping into the fire pit. I can finish my studies and become a lawyer. In the coming decades I can use this money to do thousands of good deeds. I can help countless poor people like me. What a simple math problem this is. One life for 1,000 lives minus a negative number equals adding a positive number. From a utilitarian perspective, this is not only forgivable. It is simply a form of justice, a moral obligation. You see, this is the trap. Raskolnikov does not kill because he wants to do evil. He kills because he wants to do good. He is driven by a kind of rational egoism. He believes that if everyone makes the choice of maximum net benefit through rational calculation, the world will become a utopia. The most terrifying thing about this idea is that it dissolves guilt. It makes you feel when you swing the axe that you are not committing a crime but executing a sacred social engineering project. Moreover, this calculation also hides another more secret ambition of his. He wants to test himself. He wants to know if he is a rule-abiding louse, or a special human being possessing the new word like Napoleon. He observes history and finds that those great men, Napoleon, Muhammad, they all advanced over corpses. They never spared bloodshed for grander goals. And history not only did not judge them but crowned them. Raskolnikov thinks, perhaps I am such a person too. Maybe I have the right to cross that line. Maybe so-called morality is just a chain used by the weak to bind the strong, and I have the key. So he makes his move. On a stifling afternoon he sews an axe into his coat and walks into the old woman's apartment. He raises the axe and smashes the skull of that social tumor with the back of the axe. Everything seems to be going according to plan. The negative number is wiped out, the obstacle is cleared. However, at this instant reality gives his rationality a loud slap in the face. The variable he didn't count in his formula, the old woman's innocent sister Lizaveta, suddenly walks into the room. She sees the corpse, sees the blood-soaked Raskolnikov. She stands there in horror, unable to even scream. Raskolnikov's rational calculator crashes at this moment. His formula didn't have this item. To cover up the crime he has to raise the axe and kill this innocent, kind woman who was even good to him. 2. This second axe blow completely shatters all his theories. If killing the old woman could barely be defended as ridding the people of an evil, then what is killing Lizaveta? This is just pure, savage, irrational fear and brutality. When he escapes from that room he does not feel the joy of victory like Napoleon. He does not feel he has become a Superman. On the contrary, he feels he is less than a louse. From that moment on, the gates of hell open to him. Not the hell after death, but a living hell right here and now. He starts to have a fever, starts to have nightmares, starts to faint on the street. Whenever someone looks at him, he feels the other person has seen through him. Whenever someone mentions this murder case, he cannot help but tremble. This is exactly what Dostoevsky wants to tell us. You think you can cut the world neatly with reason. You think you can judge who should die and who should live like God. But you forgot you yourself are also part of this chaotic network. When you cut off someone else's lifeline, you also cut off your own connection with humanity. Raskolnikov did not become a god. He just kicked himself out of that warm common circle of humanity. Forever. He finds that no matter how many perfect logical loops he builds in his mind, no matter how many high-sounding words of utilitarianism he uses to arm himself, the moment the blood splattered on his face, his body, his nerves, his subconscious, betrayed his brain. His body is screaming, this is wrong, this is wrong. This physiological rejection, this fear and nausea deep in the marrow, cannot be explained by reason at all. It is like trying to convince your stomach to digest a stone. No matter how perfect your theory is, your stomach will only do one thing: spit it out. This is the fulfillment of the underground mound's prophecy in reality. We are not piano keys. We are not rational calculators either. We are essentially creatures deeply rooted in this culture, this moral network. You want to pull your own hair and leave the earth. You want to invent a brand new set of morals. Raskolnikov tried. The result is he did not ascend to become a god, but fell into becoming a frightened beast. Now he faces a choice more difficult than surrendering or escaping. He either continues to deceive himself for the rest of his life, continues to hold on with those pale theories, telling himself, I was not wrong, I was just unlucky, and then slowly goes mad in an isolated mental prison. Or he must find a power stronger and older than reason, to save his shattered soul. Where is this power? It is not in the textbooks of law school nor in the leaflets of radicals. It is in a place he least expected. In a prostitute who sells her body to support her family. Her name is Sonia. In Raskolnikov's spiritual hell. When all the lights of reason go out, a candle lights up in the darkness. This candle is not some great philosopher nor some profound theory, but a frail, terrified girl forced to sell her body to support her family. Sonia. If you look with secular eyes, Sonia's life is simply a disaster. Her father Marmeladov is a hopeless drunkard, spending the family's little money and even the money Sonia exchanged with her body on vodka. Her stepmother has lung disease and there is a bunch of hungry younger siblings screaming for food to keep this family from starving. Sonia, as a devout Christian, has to take that shameful yellow ticket and walk onto the streets to do the profession at the bottom of society. According to Raskolnikov's previous rational formula, isn't Sonia's life also worthless? She is even more miserable than that old woman because she is still suffering continuous humiliation. But when Raskolnikov looks at this girl, he feels not contempt but shock. He asks that cruel question in the book. That rational nihilistic question. Sonia, you live so painfully and God hasn't saved you. Why don't you just jump into the river and die, ending it all? This is a typical Raskolnikov-style question. If viewed from the perspective of a stop-loss, suicide is indeed Sonia's most rational choice. But the answer Sonia gives instantly shatters him. She looks at him in horror as if he is speaking an alien language. She says, if I die, what about those children? They will starve. At this moment, two worldviews collide violently. On one side is Raskolnikov's rational egoism. He is calculating my gains and losses, my suffering, my Superman status. On the other side is Sonia's holy foolishness. She didn't consider me at all. Her axis of life is not on herself but on responsibility to others and love for others. Although her body is in the mud, her soul is at a height Raskolnikov cannot reach. This contrast is so strong that the murderer who thought he was Napoleon makes an astonishing move. He suddenly kneels down in front of Sonia and kisses her feet. He says, "I do not bow to you, I bow to all the suffering of humanity." This is not just a dramatic action. This is the first time rational arrogance bows its head before sacred sacrifice. Raskolnikov begins to realize. When pursuing so-called freedom, he actually locked himself in a coffin with only himself. While Sonia, although trapped, although spurned by society, remains deeply connected to this world because of this self-sacrificing love. She is free even if she is a prostitute. He is a slave even if he is a Superman. At the same time, another key figure is also forcing Raskolnikov to face the truth. That is the detective in charge of investigating the case, Porfiry. Porfiry is not the kind of policeman who only looks for fingerprints and checks surveillance. He is a master of psychology of that era. He had long guessed that Raskolnikov was the murderer, but he had no evidence. More importantly, he was in no hurry to arrest him. He conducted a cruel yet merciful psychological siege on Raskolnikov. Porfiry said something very profound to him. Roughly meaning, "I know you did it. I could arrest you right now, but that would do you no good. You need to accept not only legal punishment but also the punishment of conscience. If you run away now, where can you run to? Even if you run to America, you carry this hell with you. You remain a lonely ghost who has cut off all ties. What you need is confession, what you need is suffering. Because only through suffering can you reconnect the umbilical cord you cut." Friends, here is a very profound philosophical concept: confession. Why do we need to confess after doing something wrong? Is it just because we are afraid of the police catching us? No. Confession is essentially a kind of return. When you commit a crime, whether it is killing or lying, you are actually declaring, "I do not belong to your community, I do not follow your rules, I am above you." This is extreme loneliness. And when you confess, when you accept punishment, you are saying, "I acknowledge this rule is legitimate, I acknowledge I am part of you, I am willing to pay the price for a ticket back." This is a reconciliation not with the police but with the human species. Raskolnikov finally couldn't hold on. That physiological nausea, that soul-tearing pain made him unable to breathe. He realized when he killed that old woman he didn't kill any principle. He only killed himself. He once thought suffering was a sign of weakness. But now he finds suffering is the only real signal. It is reminding him you are still human, your conscience is not completely dead. If you don't feel pain, then you are truly dead. In the final climax of the book, Raskolnikov makes a choice. He walks to the bustling Haymarket Square. That is the dirtiest but most vibrant place in St. Petersburg. In full view of everyone amidst countless mocking gazes. He kneels down and kisses that dirty earth. He confesses to the earth, he confesses to the lice he despised. This kneel completely shattered his lofty, rational self. That Napoleon who tried to calculate life with logic died. That Rodion who is flesh and blood, who feels pain, cries, loves and regrets, finally came alive. He then walks into the police station. At that moment, although he was about to lose his physical freedom, about to face 8 years of hard labor in Siberia, he felt an unprecedented lightness. Because the devil in his head that kept chattering, trying to rationalize everything, finally shut up. He no longer needs to lie. He finally landed. He is finally no longer a god floating in the air, but a sinner stepping on the ground. And this is precisely the beginning of redemption. But does the story end here? If this were a Hollywood movie, rousing music should play now and subtitles rise. And he lived happily ever after. No, Dostoevsky is not that kind of cheap writer. He knows even if he confessed, even if he went to Siberia, Raskolnikov's road to soul reconstruction is still terribly long. Because this Neil only broke the old shell. How the new life grows is another even more difficult story. And the seed of this new life is held in the hands of that seemingly weak but actually incredibly tough woman, Sonia. She will follow him to Siberia, she will be in that ice and snow, using love instead of theory to stitch up this man's broken soul bit by bit. This leaves us with the last and most important question. For us living in the 21st century, for us who haven't killed anyone but are equally troubled by rationality, nihilism and anxiety, What exactly does Raskolnikov's story mean? We don't have axes, nor do we have Siberia. But inside us all lives a basement, lives an arrogant self trying to cut off ties. How should we find our redemption in this godless era? How should we love a life that is imperfect and even full of suffering? Friends, Raskolnikov's story is over. But our story has just begun. Although we didn't really take an axe to kill people. But inside every one of us lives a miniature version of Raskolnikov. Look at our lives. Do we also often fall into that arrogance of reason? Do we also feel that as long as we earn enough money, optimize time management, read enough books, we can solve our life like a math problem and get a perfect answer? We live in an era that worships logic. We use algorithms to match love data, to measure health KPIs, to assess value. We try to cut out all uncertainty in life. Just like cutting out that annoying old woman. We think this is progress, this is turning from lice into supermen. But the result? What we feel in the dead of night is still that familiar bone-chilling cold. That same sense of isolation Raskolnikov felt after the crime. If Dostoevsky were alive, how would he look at us? He would probably let out a long sigh and tell us the cruelest yet most merciful truth. Logic can only predict what will happen, but logic can never predict life itself. Life is overflowing, life is chaotic, life cannot be formulated. In The Brothers Karamazov, through the mouth of Elder Zosima, he voiced his deepest critique of this abstract reason. He said there are many so-called intellectuals who love humanity with tears in their eyes. They are willing to sacrifice themselves for the happiness of all mankind, to go to the guillotine. But if you ask them to love a specific person, a neighbor living next door who is grumpy and has bad breath, they cannot do it. They will be disgusted and even want to kill this specific neighbor. Isn't this a portrayal of our times? We are indignant online for distant justice, we love abstract justice. But we are indifferent to our family beside us, blind to strangers asking for help. Raskolnikov loved the abstract humanity to the extreme. That's why he felt it was acceptable to kill a specific person for this abstract goal. This is a disease of the intellect. So what is the antidote? The antidote is not higher logic nor a more perfect social system. The antidote is a specific love. Just like Sonia to Raskolnikov. Not loving his theories, not loving his potential, but loving that sinner who is covered in blood and broken right here and now. Dostoevsky tells us, if you want to save yourself, you must stop dreaming in that crystal palace of reason. You must walk out into that dirty, imperfect reality full of suffering. To love specific people, to do specific things. He said something deafening in the book. Love life more than the meaning of it. This sentence is worth carving into your brain. The biggest problem with modern people is that we care too much about meaning. Before we do anything, we ask, what's the use of this? What's the meaning of this? If logic tells us it's meaningless, we don't do it. But Dostoevsky says wrong, the order is reversed. You must first love, first throw yourself into living. Logic and meaning will follow. If you insist on finding meaning before you are willing to live, you are destined to die on the way of searching. Just like those 5 minutes before the death sentence. When death approached, all logic collapsed. Only the most primitive and sacred desire for living itself remained. That ray of sunlight on the church dome, does it have any logic? It doesn't, it just exists, it is just beauty. And it is precisely this beauty, this existence without reason, that saved Dostoevsky. He said in The Idiot, beauty will save the world. This is not talking about pretty faces, but that beauty of the soul, like Christ, like Sonia. That is willing to open its arms to embrace the world even in suffering. So friends, when we turn off this video and return to our respective lives, I hope you can take one thing with you. Not a new knowledge point nor a new topic for conversation, but a kind of courage. The courage to admit I don't know. The courage to admit I am not a Superman. The courage to dare to be a fool, dare to love, dare to suffer. Stop trying to turn yourself into a piano key. Stop trying to hack out a new world with an axe. Lower your head, look at the ground beneath your feet. Look at that specific person next to you. Feel the pain because pain means you are still alive. Embrace the chaos because chaos is the soil of life. Believe that even in the darkest basement, as long as your soul leaves a crack open, light can shine in. This road is destined to be lonely. In this world full of noise and anesthetic, staying awake is a pain. But I know, since you can watch until here, since you can persist until now in this long video, it means inside your heart also lives that restless underground man. It means you are not resigned to just being a happy screw. If you feel that today's content touched a chord in your soul, if you want to continue searching for this deep resonance in this superficial era, then welcome to join us. I am not some mentor, nor do I have any ultimate answers. I am just a traveler in the desert who refuses to walk into that door. And you are my fellow traveler. I am your friend. In this absurd world, let us stay awake together. See you next time.